high in the early 80s, with the success of, their Bauer and Blitz cover and all that. Did you know Crocus was
Oh,
still making
hi. Didn't
albums
see you
as
there.
of 2010?
Welcome. Let me
And
pause this for a
that's
minute.
when this one came out, called...
So, welcome to 2021. We've made it. Unlike last year, I hope this year is brighter and better. So this is my contest entry for Eric Bauer's 4 meaningful albums, and one has to have a cop, which I think it's really more 3 meaningful albums, because usually the one with the cop is probably not the most meaningful for most people's collections. It's been a challenge, and I'm glad that I didn't jump on it right away. It was very interesting seeing some of the other contest entries and what they had to show. Also, I'm a bit of a procrastinator, which might be part of the reason. So anyway, I'm going to show you 3 records that were really meaningful to me. One, which is still meaningful, it has a cop on it, as I mentioned. But I also noticed there's a bit of a theme with these records I'm going to show. They sort of became a bit of a realization albums, as I will dive into and sort of explain about how I came into them and why they were significant during particular stages of my life. So let's move on to number 1. Number 1 is Iron Maiden's Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. So I figured I'd start off with a true classic. This followed up Somewhere in Time, which came out in 1986. This was released in 1988, and really amazing artwork. So this is the first Maiden album I've ever came into true possession of. When I was a really, really young child, I remember the cover to Peace of Mind, and that scared the crap out of me. But I never owned it before this one. So how did I come into possession of this? So I don't remember the particular year, but I want to say it's around late 1990, early 1991. So I must have been about probably 11 years old or so. I remember I came into possession of this tape. I no longer have that tape. It was lost through the bastions of time, unfortunately. But I remember I wore the shit out of that tape too. And I listened to it time and time again. But to give you some context, in my old hometown, there weren't too many metalheads, or what should I say, 6th grader metalheads that I knew of. Everybody was into the whole MC Hammer, and gangster rap was big. All those stuff was going on. So I was the closeted metalhead, and I was listening to this Maiden album, and I remember something. I wasn't thinking I'm pretty much a metalhead. I just knew that many of my crowd found this a little bit of oddball and cheesy, and it was just not their thing. They just didn't get it. And this young, impressionable kid, I like what I heard. Good music is good music, man. So anyway, I remember one day at a bus stop, so it was maybe like 3 or 4 of us, and I had my backpack, and us kids, right? We got our Jan Sports and not completely zippered all the way, and I remember the 2 tapes I had in my bag that day. So it was this, and please, okay, yeah, you can laugh. It was Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch. Both tapes fell down, and Marky Mark, of course, which had a member, the guy from Boston, right? Look it up. Anyway, but look at in hindsight, I got laughed at for this, but not the Marky Mark tape. So anyway, one fellow there, he was a bit of I want to say a bit of an Eric Cartman type, was laughing at me, trying to get the crowd along to also kind of shame me for being this headbanger. He said, "Roll, look at that. Rick is a headbanger. Ooh, I blushed a little. I was out of the closet. I was a fucking metalhead. So I owned it. And I go, I guess I am. So I rocked the tape. At that point, I didn't care. Thank you, Maiden. Thank you, shitty JanSport book bags. So that's my number one. Let's move on to number two. Number two. It is Life of Agony's River Runs Red. Yeah, maybe you can see it better here. This album came out in 1993. Let me show you the disc. It is New York hardcore. And this is the album that made me realize, God, I fucking love hardcore. I didn't get hardcore before this. Some of my friends were into it. A lot of it was a little too much on the punky side. And I think what really appealed to me with this was that it pretty much was quite heavy, and it had a lot of the kind of groove that I liked, that a lot of the metal bands were into at the time. But it still had a lot of the traditional New York hardcore sort of feelings and melodies and everything behind it. So the year was 1994, and I started high school. I was a freshman. And as I've explained with number one, I was pretty much already an outed metalhead. And I still went through my hip-hop phase and all that stuff. So I was into all kinds of things. Now, the thing is, I used to hang out very, very briefly with this senior kid. And, one day he saw me walking to school because school buses are for sissies, right? At least that was the thinking behind it. So anyway, I thought it was also cool to hang out with the senior, but he also had a driver's license. So anyway, he said, "Hey, dude, you want to lift?" So, we was playing some cool shit in the car. We're on the way to the school. I was this new high schooler, and he's like, "Hey, man, you want this?" I'm like, so he gave me this tape. So I still have the tape. So this is the original Life of Agony tape from 1994. Again, another one. I wore the shit out of it. And you can't even read the letter anymore. I had to actually write a marker in, should I say, what side was what. And, so this is pretty much unplayable at this point. So I just hold on to it for nostalgia reasons or whatever. But since that, I picked up a proper CD, and, it's a little more resilient, than that. But here's the thing, man. Like, the way he gave me the tape was very strange. I actually did not listen to this right away. It's almost like, when a drug dealer sort of bit of your pal at first and gives you your first hit free. He's like, "Hey, man, yeah, all is cool. Here, take your dose, your kilo, whatever." Yeah, probably not a kilo for a first timer, but that's the way he gave me this tape. He's like, "Here, man, you will enjoy it. You'll enjoy it very much." So then I'm like, "Thank you. I will enjoy it." So that was very strange. So this was the early 90s. The whole thing with strange people, don't talk to strangers or whatnot, was still like a thing, in the air. And even though I was hanging out with this dude, I was still kind of worried about people and, just odd behaviors. But I wanted to be with the cool kids, So I still took the tape, listened to it. How harmful can music be, right? But, it was one of my new loves. And this is the album that really put me on a big hardcore kick. And great listen. Classic album. I know that Sal Abuscrado, who played in Typo Negative's Bloody Kisses album, so very familiar drumming, who also plays in this album. So even if you're not into hardcore, still check this out. It's pretty much in that metallic range. I know Integrity already put out their first album by then, and because of other bands, we're moving more and more towards those leanings. And So if you're not into the more punkier side of things when it comes to hardcore, check these guys out. So that's my number 2. Number 3 was the album that started to kickstart my love for doom metal. And it's probably not the kind of albums that you'd think. And the album is Amorphous Tales from the Thousand Lakes. Just looking at that cover is pretty suggestive. I mean, if you look at Obituaries, The Incomplete, and albums like that, that real doomy look, even though Obituary is not a doom band, that kind of aesthetic really draws me in, though. But this particular album here is very different from the Amorphous discography. So, what's my story with this one? Now, this is not my first Amorphous album. It would have to be Elegy. That was one of the first CDs I picked up when I moved to Philly. It was that and a Dillinger CD. So anyway, so I listened to Elegy quite a bit. It was very different from what I was used to hearing from the Tampa bands and the New York death metal bands and all the stuff that was going on at the time. And at the time, you know, you didn't have the internet like we do today, or it was very rudimentary, and you didn't have the access to the stuff that was happening overseas as readily available. So I didn't come to this until I downloaded it from this thing called Napster at the time. So I had this on MP3 for quite a while, and holy shit, man, I've never heard anything quite like this and so doomy. This will be put as a more of a death metal album. I think the previous release, the Corellian Isthmus, was their first full length. This is their second full length. The album before this had more of that traditional death metal leanings, but by the time they moved to this, the riffs were more slowed down. It had it just had a very desolate feeling, and I think they were trying to do something different with this. They weren't quite sure the direction they wanted to go. I see this as a very transitional album, because after this, they started to move more towards cleaner singing. This was the last album that was fully under the whole death growl. So death growl that even the bonus tracks that were released with this some time later had the Doors' Light My Fire. So if you want to know what a death metal version of that sounds like, or maybe don't check it out. I may not be doing you a favor there. Anyway, so by the time they moved on to Elegy, you could hear them moving more towards the cleaner singing, and you know, there's lots of that even with Amorphous today. But this album, even if you're not an Amorphous fan, but if you consider yourself a doom metal fan, in my eyes, this is a doom metal album, and a really good one. It's very accessible, very catchy. It doesn't try to be this thinking man's kind of metal. It's just very punchy. First Doom, Black Winter Day are some of my favorites. Magic and Mayhem are that's also another staple. Great album overall, but this was my realization for Doom, or just the discovery of my taste for it at the time. I actually went out and picked up proper CD sometime later, and lost that since then. And so for now, I just have this record in the meantime. So I'll probably pick up another CD sometime later. But Amorphous, Tales from a Thousand Lakes, definitely to this day, it's a classic. It's a banger. There's very few albums I can put on a needle, and it's just like still an instant orgasm. So check it out. That's my number 3. Number 4. Okay, so this is the one with the cop. This was a bit of a bitch to find. I had maybe one or two I could have leaned onto, but either A, it wasn't too clear if there was a cop or just a soldier and all that stuff. So Eric Bauer, I think would appreciate this one. I know he's quite a boss, man, when it comes to like punk rock knowledge, hardcore, and a lot of the underground stuff. So my pick was this band. I forget where they're from, but this came out in 1994 or 95. I forget the exact time this came out, but they are called Green Day. And the album is called Dookie. So this is a what you call a pop punk album. And does it have a cop? Yes. Right here. I'll zoom in. There's your kappa. And why is this particular album meaningful? Because it came at just the right time and age for someone of my demographic. So I was this 14, 15-year-old, and this little network, they played this thing that you may not see around much today called music videos. And music videos were provided by this network called MTV. Yeah, and I think they're still around, believe it or not. So anyway, I used to play the shit out of this album. I had a CD. I bought it through something called a BMG Music Club. So I got it for like a penny. So if you don't like this at all, just know that I got it for a penny. And that's how they lured you in. And, paid up the nose with all the other CDs I got after that. But, for what it was, pop punk album, Longview, Welcome to Paradise, these were on constant rotation on MTV. This shit just stuck to your head over and over and over. This brings back memories of MTV, those years, this band in their heyday. Shit. It's just for what it was, not a bad album. Green Day, Dookie. Eric, check out this band. You might like them. They're not underground like some of the other bands, but and I think they're still around. I think they're still putting out albums. But I probably wouldn't encourage you to go towards that latter half of the discography. But Green Day, Dookie, you may like. Alright, I'm fucking with you guys. Y'all know who Green Day is. Enjoy. I'm out. Hope I win.